Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Red Lettuce. I'm your host, Eric Unger. I'm joined with my co-host, Robert Grillo, and we have a special guest with us. We have Maila Costa. She is a militant with the Brazilian Communist Party and an activist for animal liberation. She has been carrying out independent research on Marxist animalism. Maila, welcome to The Red Lettuce.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, guys.
Of course. So I caught your article, which was titled "Marxism and the Animal Question," and I was really caught by how well researched it was and how well written it was, and so I'm really glad that you can join us to discuss this very important topic, which is missing on the left
Good.
a lot.
Yeah. I'd say there isn't like a lot of stuff like this published nowadays, and even if there is no many things in different languages. It's all concentrated in English and German. So that's why I am trying to study this subject like here in Brazil, so I can produce some good stuff in Portuguese and Spanish as well, not just English.
Right.
Fantastic. So what languages do you write and speak in?
I can say like I am fluent just in Portuguese and in English, but like I can read and write in Spanish. I'm not so accurate, so I need a little bit of revision after that. And I can read in Italian as well, but I'm not like a Italian speaker. And I am just studying German now. So I'd say in 1 or 2 years, I will be able to research in German and write something in German too.
I see. That's terrific. And your native language is what?
Portuguese.
Portuguese. Okay.
Portuguese.
And so how did you get into the subject matter? Tell us a little bit about your personal kind of connection with the subject and how you came to be interested and passionate about this.
Well, what happened to me was I was just like a Marxist, and I moved to Ireland 5 or 6 years ago. 6 years ago, and there I just started to notice that people were vegan, because back here in Brazil it was not a thing. Like I didn't know anyone that was a vegan in my city, and there in Ireland I started to notice that there was this kind of like way of life or something like that. And of course, as a Marxist, I found it a little bit like, oh, this is something just for rich people, for medium class, all these things we have. But then I noticed like a lot of people, even like working class people, really simple people, like were doing that and like fighting for animals. And it was really quick for me. And like in some months, I just could like I don't know, understand that it was everything important, and that we should try to unite all this struggle. And I start my research and in the Marx and Engels work to find out what they talked about animals, and that was not like so comforting for us in this sense. But I'd say using the methods, like we can produce like a lot of good stuff, and not just theoretically, but like to use in the struggle, in practice, like in praxis. So that's what happened to me.
So it was because of your experience in Ireland. So how long were you in Ireland while this was happening?
Yeah, I lived there for 4 years, and just right when I arrived there, I knew people that were vegan, like that became my friends, and some of them were Brazilian as well. They lived just like some kilometers from me in Brazil. So I didn't know there was this reality here in Brazil, you know what I mean? So it was really surprising for me, because I don't remember like having heard this kind of thing here. I don't know, because in the state where I live, we have this barbecue culture. So it's
Yeah.
really strong. No one talk about like not eating animals. It's not a thing. It's so barbecue is really strong. That's why I think I didn't like heard about this. So just when I arrived there, I start like to live with like flatmates and other people that were vegetarian, vegan, and at the beginning I just found it really weird. There's no, it doesn't make sense because it's not like the demand that dictates the production, it's the production. And I was with this kind of narrative, but then I found myself being encouraged because I could accept that there was suffering and that the all this production were just because of profit. So why couldn't I try to change it, to oppose it in some way? So that I changed just ethics and the currents. That's what made me change, turn vegan. And I wasn't vegetarian even for one day. I just one day I said, okay, so tomorrow I'm not going to do it anymore, and I became vegan. So it was like that.
And you felt like, were you, because when I got into this, I felt like I had to really, it was more than just not supporting these industries anymore. It was, I really had to make a contribution. I still feel this today, but 12 years ago when I first got into this, I felt it then. I felt like I really had to make some kind of contribution and speak the truth to power against these industries, because they're so hidden, and our practices of supporting them are so culturally ingrained that I thought, oh God, there's so much work to be done here. I have to contribute to this. Did you kind of have that feeling too?
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, from the first moment I got this, because I just thought it made all sense, but I didn't have like material. I mean, as Marx, speaking as a Marxist, I didn't have like a concrete like theory, or some people, except from Angela Davis, or that's like well now talking about this. And I just felt like, oh my God, that's one of the reasons why Marxists are not into this, because there is no tradition like. And I just thought like, we have to help to build this, because it's obvious, everyone can recognize that it's wrong to cause suffering, that animals can feel pain, despair, affection. Everyone know that it's not something new. So how can we like make like a knowledge system, like make like a theory that make people like Marxists understand it better and try to bring it like to the struggle? Because I even don't like this division, because when you use the totality category, we understand everything like contributes and affects like one another. So there is no point in divide, like, because the animals are included in the social relations. They are part of the relations of production. So that's why I have been like writing a lot and reading a lot, and even in Marx and Engel's work we can find a lot of good like stuff that we can of course they are not saying be vegan,
Right.
but they are giving us a lot of hints about like how we should use like historical materialism to analyze and to act on the question. I think that's the point, like we
Yeah.
use the method, not what they said, because of course it was like 150 years ago, like it
Right.
was another reality. Yeah,
Yeah, but even then, Marx was even, saying that we need to, capitalism also dominates nature, and we have to liberate nature from capitalism, and that includes animals.
yeah,
Some people mistakenly think that, Marx was a speciesist, and from what I've read, I don't think so. Like he, like you said, didn't point blank say we gotta go vegan, but he did take into account nature and animals.
yeah, I'd say the
Right.
only place that I found where he refers specifically to animals in an empathetic way was in the Jewish question, when
Yep.
we quotes the other guy, the Thomas Münzer, saying the creatures must be free. But even in the capital, he makes the separation between like human labor, between the animal labor, in between the rest of the nature, for example. So he's not saying at any moment that like a stone and a car is the same thing. He's not saying that. And he's not saying anywhere that we have the natural right of using these animals as we please. And that's something really important, because sometimes we see even some Marxists using this natural right, like saying, okay, but like we have to interact with nature. Of course we have, like as humans, but like we don't have to exploit nature. We don't have to make them suffer. We don't have to produce like social suffering. That's the point.
Right.
Right.
Maybe we can just dive into your article a little bit. Maybe we can start with going over what Marxist animal abolitionism means.
Yeah, I think this, I don't know even if this exists or I created this, this expression, this term, but I just think it's important that we have these, because when we have like the liberal movement, like even veganism or for animal liberation in general, we have this understanding that a kind of metaphysical thing, that we exploit animals because we are bad, or I don't know, because we just want so. And when we think it like using historical materialism, we can understand that we exploit animals because we need it in like historically sometime, and then it developed to a kind of speciesism, as we have with racism, sexism, and all the other kind of oppressions. So I think that's the difference. When we understand that a specific mode of production that causes all this exploitation, we understand that we have to abolish this mode of production. So I'd say we can say that the Marxist animal liberation movement or abolitionism sees the question like using this point of view. We have to abolish like classes, we have to abolish like the private property in order to reorganize the production. And so that's the moment when we can discuss and take the animals out. Take the animals out of the production relations. And that's important that when this moment comes, society is ready for this debate. Because we can't like get there and people are saying, oh, we need protein or something like that, you know? So I think as vegans, one of our duties is like bring this conscience to people, like talk about this, explain how we can have a life, a very good life without using animals and all this. So when this moment comes, the workers of the world will discuss and get to the decision, the probably decision where they won't find it necessary to use animals anymore. Even because we know it's destructive for the world, like all the degradation, deforestation. Even here in Brazil, we have indigenous killings because of land disputes and all these, you know. So the situation was really, really bad. In order to provide this demand of meat and animal products.
Sure. Yeah, I've heard a lot about that. And you know, great points. There's a popular counter narrative here, at least in the US. The idea among leftists that I've confronted, and I think Eric could also say he has often confronted with, the idea that there's some kind of competition between human rights and other species rights. Like as if we can't chew gum and walk at the same time. And we can't address both issues. Or like as if we're in competition with other species, which I think is a really destructive idea that comes from the very patriarchy, the very thing that we're trying to defeat as leftists, this patriarchy that says us and them. The leftists we talk to are basically playing into that, falling into that same trap that it's us and them. It's not us and them. We can accomplish both of these things. And yes, human rights issues are complex. Animal rights issues are complex too, but it requires a negative action rather than an affirmative action. A negative action meaning not supporting their exploitation could result in a huge percentage of animals not suffering and being left alone, and their habitats being left alone. So that's one of the counter narratives we get here from the left a lot is, well, we have to solve, we don't want to tell, we're trying to defend these people, these marginalized people, and we don't want to tell them not to support animal exploitation. So let's solve this problem first, and then we can try to get to the animal issue. That's kind of the counter narrative that we often hear.
Yeah, I think that it's the same here, but it's for me, it sounds really weird because there are a lot of problems and they exist all together, and we can't just pick some and choose. Okay, of course there are some for example, we have to deal with the pandemic now, so it's something really urgent. But I mean, in a normal scenario, for example, in Brazil, when we talk about animals, we are talking about people issues as well, because for example, we are in the International Division of Labor, we export our production of good meat, for example, and the meat that is in the country for working class people is the worst type. So it will generate in the future diseases like diabetes, obesity, and so on. So it's not just about the animals. We have all these connected. Of course, this is not the most important, but I mean, even when we use this anthropocentric argument, you can defend the animals. And even if we speak about survival, because if we keep this animal industry, we won't even survive because of the gas emissions and degradation, deforestation, the river pollution, soil pollution. We won't be able even to plant anymore because soil crops and all this. So there is no point in saying oh, we have to choose. This dualism is something that really annoys me, because we as Marxists, we don't know, we don't do this. It's not our category. We don't use this kind of intersectional thing. We don't use it. We use the category of totality that analyzes all the relations that are going on. And we try to find all the mediations and all these, and we don't say, okay, so this matter. No, what matter is we have to oppose the ruling class. And the same ruling class that is oppressing us is oppressing these billions of animals. And there's no need for that. So that's but I'd say in Brazil, we are there are a lot of really popular movements growing. And we call here popular veganism, when we try to oppose the liberal veganism and show that you can be a person that lives in a favela, for example, and be vegan, because these people, they are not dumb, they are not stupid, they understand the same way the problems. Of course, sometimes they won't be able to buy some product or to not buy some problem, but they know it's wrong as well, and they are, of course, included in this struggle. They are protagonists in this. So it's even elitist when we say they can't be vegan. It's the opposite, I think, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah.
That's beautifully said.
Beautifully, yes.
I think you made some beautiful points there, and I would just say that I feel like the spirit of Marxism is about solidarity against oppression. And so in all of its manifestations, and certainly to exclude species would be absurd, I think, in the spirit of Marxism. So I'll just say that.
I agree. Something you said in your article really stood out to me. I kind of want to elaborate on that a little bit. you said the commitment of revolutionary praxis is to build the new and not to worship the traditions based on oppression. So when I heard that line, that really stood out to all of us who read it.
Yeah,
It makes me think of the fetishization of traditional cultures and practices as an excuse for leftists not to take up anti-speciesist praxis. Why is this the case, and how can we challenge this? How can we challenge this in leftist circles?
Yeah, because I don't know how it is in the other countries, but here in Brazil, they use the cultural factor a lot. Like when they say, oh, but like we can't like tell people that are used or they have a sentimental thing with this, I don't know, eating or doing something related to animals. I completely understand it, but we can't forget that culture doesn't come from nothing. Like we know,
yeah,
like culture is a part of the superstructure, and it's like fed by the concrete. And another thing is we have to like when we talk of indigenous people, for example, of course it's completely understandable they will hunt or they will fish for their survival, and it's okay, it's different, it's another situation. Like those animals are not included in the production relations. They are not there for profit. It's just like a means of survival. So in this case, culture can be acceptable for this argument. But when we talk of like I going to the supermarket and picking like fish or bacon or whatever, what culture is that? What kind of culture are we talking about? So I can't even like I think like Marxists that use this argument can't even be being serious, because it's so ridiculous that it's something basic for us, that the things like they come from somewhere, they come for a reason. There is a historical like uh, 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 I don't remember the word in English, but I mean you got me. It's not from nothing. So how can you just say no, we can't like say to people they can't eat meat or whatever because it's cultural? Okay, but sexism is cultural as well, racism is cultural as well, especially when we talk of Brazil, United States, we have slavery. So it's something really, really strong, like a really like strong question. And we will have like people, white supremacists and all this, and we won't say, okay, you're fine, it's just culture. No, it's something horrible.
Right.
You know? So I like to do this. Yeah, these comparisons, because we can understand more. And even when we talk about culture, we have some countries in the world where they mutilate like children, for example, girls.
right. I was just thinking of female genital.
Yeah, it's cultural. It's something millennial. I don't know. But we won't say that's fine when there is suffering, when there is no need, like material need for that. Like it's just something that was reproduced for centuries for a reason, but we have to overcome this. Like, and even Marx said that we can't like be attached to these things that will stop us from growing, you know, from getting better.
Wasn't it just Sudan that outlawed or banned female genital mutilation, I believe, just a few weeks ago? And, you know, I was talking to Eric about this and Mitch, our other co-host, but in the late 70s, early 80s, Alice Walker, who was kind of kind of a radical thinker at the time when she was younger anyway, she wrote a book about female genital mutilation in the 80s. And she's an African-American woman of American descent. In other words, you know, she's been here for several generations. And the response to this book was so scathing from people here and in Africa, in African countries, that she actually retreated for several years, I think, if I remember correctly in her biography. She retreated from activism and from being in the public eye for quite a while. She was afraid, she had death threats, and she was afraid for her life. But she spoke out against female genital mutilation in a way that was kind of universal, like as if it's not that the particular culture or race has anything wrong with it, and we're not critiquing that. We're critiquing the actual practice and the blind acceptance of a practice that is actually practiced in many countries around the world, and saying that the practice itself is immoral or wrong, or is victimizing. And so I just, whenever I think of that, I think back to her and how she kind of pioneered that, and then she had to retreat for a while because it was the backlash was so powerful. It just, I mean, we have to kind of like, I guess my point is, we will find ourselves in positions of having to speak truth to power in ways that are very unpopular and will trigger a backlash. And we have to be so strong. A lot of people, including myself, sometimes feel, yeah, you don't want to deal with that, but we have to do it because we know what's right,
Yeah, but I think that, as he said before, it's not even a proper argument. It is just because when you are in that phase of denial, so we try to find something to use in your favor. And when we think of ideological dominance, and it's one of the characteristics is this: you deny it. You can't like see that there is something going on. You can see that's ideological. And then I say like carnism, as we call like the act of like eating meat, for example, is ideological. And it's something really strong to say because it's something that annoys like people saying, no, it's not, like it's cultural. Yeah, but culture is ideological as well. When it's like in a society of humans like us, it's ideological. We can't escape this. So I'd say these people, leftists and Marxists, when they use this culture thing and poor people can't be vegans and all these arguments, it's just because they are in this room, like dark room, where they cannot accept, like they can accept there is suffering, they can accept that is wrong, but they cannot like step out and say, okay, I'm going to embrace it and I'm going to stop. Like I'm going to oppose with this kind of products or whatever. So I think this is this line. It has to have something really specific and particular and subjective to every person, like to change. Like some are more open, and I'd say the youth. Like I can see in my party, for example, all the youth, they are vegetarians, vegans, so it's changing. But the older ones like are harder, because they are more attached to traditions and even the masculinity, that thing like, oh, I have like to eat meat and all this. So there is a lot of factors, but I think the most important is we are talking about this. It's acceptable nowadays to talk about this among Marxists, because if you talk about that like 5 years ago, no one would listen to you. Everyone would say you're crazy. And I can see it's changing. Like people are more open, even when they are not vegan, that like they accept there is something going on, something wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I noticed, I asked you that because over here in the US, in my experience, I've run into a lot of white leftists who use this excuse. They say, well, the indigenous our indigenous ancestors or our indigenous comrades, they used to do, this is what they used to do, this is the husbandry of the land and the animals, this is what they did. And well, you're not indigenous, you're white, and you have a Whole Foods down the street from you. What is your excuse? Like that, or they'll say, well, there's a lot of poor communities of color that have food deserts and don't have access to vegan products. I'm like, okay, well, if you're not in that position, then that shouldn't stop you.
And that's more important is this fact of not the indigenous people, that another situation, but this fact that poor people and working class people exist, that they cannot afford to get other products than these products with animals. It shows again how everything is wrong, and like these people, they cannot even consume what they think it's right or the ideal, or they cannot like choose to oppose to this kind of suffering. So once again, we cannot use it an excuse. It's the opposite. We have to guarantee that those people, they can like have these products or food or whatever in the best way, that ethically fulfill like what they believe to be the right. Not saying, okay, it's fine, you're gonna be eating this for all your life, like just eat like that animals and it's fine. No, like I can't see that this way. I think it's just like one more reason to fight like for it, not just to get like used to that situation.
Yeah,
Right.
and I kind of want to move to my next question, if Robert, if you don't have any at the moment.
Go right ahead. Sure.
What's the connection between imperialism and animal agriculture? Why do you think animal ag is often left out of the anti-imperialist discourse?
Well, what we can see, especially in Engels' work, is that this expansion, the colonialist expansion, has everything to do with animals. He describes very well how these countries were able to modify the plants, the animals, and to transport like to one country to another these animals and plants and everything. And through artificial selection, we can't even identify these animals anymore. And he wrote it like 150 years ago, and we can see how it is like really like actual. And I like to refer to, remember I think it was this year or last year that that thing with the camels happened in Australia, where the camels were invading the cities and eating everything, drinking the water. I don't know if you remember that. But if we think like these camels were brought there like by English guys,
Right.
and they were not supposed to be there in first place. So it's really easy to blame the animals and say, oh my God, they are monsters. They are like trying to kill people or drinking people's water or whatever. But like first of all, why the hell were they there? Like they were not supposed to be there. And when we think like even in Asia, where these countries, they don't have this culture of drinking milk or eating some kinds of animal products, and like the market is like devastating them with this. They are like consuming a lot. Even with Brazil, we have this economic relation with China that's really complicated, because they buy a lot of animal products and even food for animals from us, and they are now willing to change this. They want to reduce their meat consumption, and it will cause something to our economy as well, because our economy is pretty agrarian and all this. So we can see how it's all like connected. We have the biggest meat processor company in the world, that's JBS, that's in Brazil and United States as well.
Right.
And we can, after the internationalization, the company like grew. It's crazy. Like, and the worst thing, they are not even just in the food branch now. They are buying all the kinds of companies you can imagine. So what means that like an animal killer, that's a company, is kind of controlling all the other branches of the economy in the country as well. So we can see how it's everything interconnected. And most important, when we talk, for example, when the capitalism consolidated in Europe, we have England like in front of this, and we have they doing Ireland like just a country to supply what they need. And when it was I don't know, corn it's fine. When it's meat, it's fine. And when I was there and I saw all that sheep there, and it's so cute. And then when you study and you learn why they have so many sheep and why the country is like a sheep producer, and you relate to this imperialist and colonialist thing. And even when we talk about the winnering in England, when we talk about like all the struggles and the everything that was going on that Engels and Marx wrote, we think, okay, but what were they producing with wool? And where this wool comes? It comes from animals, from sheep. So in this sense, you can kind of understand like how animals are related to the consolidation of capitalism itself, to the colonialism, and ending up in what we have nowadays.
Connection with speciesism, racism, and sexism. And I think we should touch on that a little bit, because I think that's really prevalent in meat-eating cultures such as the United States, where forms of domination like racism and sexism are very pronounced. And I think it's really linked, and speciesism is connected to all that. Maybe you can elaborate on how they're all connected: speciesism, racism, and sexism.
Yeah, I think first.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to add the fact that we have recent studies, interesting studies about how these people that are have a certain kind of prejudice, right, whether against race or skin color or religion or whatever, definitely are more prone to support animal exploitation and speciesism. So there's some really exciting new studies to show the connection too that we have. So please, Maila, go ahead and give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that first of all, when we accept that we can like torture and cause suffering to a creature, no matter like what creature it is, it's like ultimately acceptable in some way. So like to start to accept this, to include other creatures and other species and even human species in this category of acceptable suffering is not that difficult. We can see through history how it happened. Like some moment we can say like black people are not humans. Some moment Jews are not humans, or women, or whatever. So I say it's all connected in this sense. When we accept that one category of beings is like subject to suffering and to this kind of treatment that's like horrible, we can like, how can we guarantee that we will not include other categories there? We cannot guarantee that. That's why, like, ethically, the safest thing that we should do is abolish all kinds of categories that are allowed to be suffering. And nowadays, of course, it's just the animals, because we don't have the slavery anymore. But if we look back to history, the slaves were treated as animals, and they used this wording because in first place, we accepted that animals were supposed to be treated like that. So there is that book, that really good book, like Carol Adams' book, like the Sexual Politics of Meat. I think that's the name in English.
Yes.
That is amazing. Like, she's not Marxist, but I mean, the book is a classical. It's really good, and she does all this connection, like between this kind of animalization and how we just include other, like women and black people or indigenous people in this same category.
Yeah. By the way, Carol Adams wrote the preface to my book in 2016 called Farm to Fable, The Fictions of Our Animal Consuming Culture. She and I had an affinity for looking critically at popular culture tropes and you know, how they play on so many different levels of race and gender and species. And I've always been fascinated by dissecting that and I always loved her work for doing that too. So thank you for bringing her up.
Yeah. Yeah, like her work is one that I always recommend, like to everyone. I like to point out always that she's not Marxist because she uses some categories, some wording that we could do better. That's the way, like that's we have the categories already, so we just
Yeah.
have to work theoretically on this. But it's, I mean, what she wrote was amazing, and it's really important that everyone read this book.
Right. And I think it's fair to say, I think pretty much this is pretty prevalent everywhere, that, you know, on the left, you know, in leftist circles, whether they're, you know, Marxist or anarchist or whatever tendency on the left, I think there's a lot of uh, there's a lack of anti-speciesism praxis. There's a lack of anti-speciesism praxis on the left, and on the vegan side or the animal rights side or animal liberation side, there's a lack of anti-capitalist praxis. And I'm wondering, you know, how can we bridge these two groups together? Because they really do go well together, because we can't liberate the working class without the liberation of animals, and vice versa. How can we bridge this gap, you think, and why does it exist in the first place?
Yeah, I think like all movements like feminism, anti-racism, the LGBT movement under capitalism will be liberal because that's the dominant ideology. So it's not even a surprise. And like animals are like another species. So if it was hard even to include women and LGBT people in the struggle for real, like for communists, like saying imagine for animals. So I'd say that's not something that we don't imagine that would be that way. But I think the vegan movement has a really strong like revolutionary like potential, because these people, they are people that they are trying to resist, to oppose what like the status quo in some way, in some way that's really important because it's something that affects our life like in a daily basis. Like it's something that every like day, all the time we face something when you go to the supermarket, when you go to someone's house, when I don't know, when we read like news regarding to this. So it's not just like as you've been, for example, I don't know, you are in a trade union, so you just have your life, your normal life, and once a week you go there and you get like you get with your comrades. It's different because veganism is something that it's essentially practical more than theoretical, unfortunately. So that's why I think we have this solidarity thing in veganism that's really important to bring to the communist movement, because on the contrary, the other movements, we cannot always objectively do something. For example, we face against racism and sexism, like against the Palestinian occupation and all this, but we cannot do something concrete. Like it's just something more symbolic, you know, when we say we are supporting them.
Yeah.
About the animals, we can do. We know, of course, if I'm not going to buy this bacon, I know someone is going to die anyway. It's not just because I'm not buying that a pork will not be killed. But what I mean is, you can do in your life something, and you can show to other people that it's possible. That's like I'd say the more important. You can show that it's not impossible to live without this.
Yeah.
And you can exercise your solidarity. You can show to people like, see, we can do this. And what I think like it's fascinating about veganism is when you become vegan, we start to notice about like how everything is made. And then you have like a clear picture of how industry and how capitalism works, because
Yeah.
you can see like there are parts of animals for like everywhere. And then you can see how the supply chain works, Like how a product that's made, I don't know, here in Brazil will end up there in China or United States or in Europe, and how we have to degrade our soil here. So in Europe, they eat our meat, for example. So I just think like with veganism, all these contradictions become clearer. And that's why I think that's a really, really potential like movement for communism itself. And that's a good reason why we have to embrace it, because we don't have to hide these contradictions. We have to show these contradictions. So more and more people will become aware and will get like revolted, I'd say, I hope.
No, yeah. I mean, that's what kind of happened with me. Like I've been vegan for maybe, over 2.5 years now. Wait, no, it's going to be 3 years in August, actually. And what got me started was, I was like more of a leftist then. I wasn't really sure where I was on the spectrum. Like, I don't know if I was a Marxist, anarchist, libertarian. So, I was going all over the place. I was still like uncovering what I was, or, researching all that. And I started watching What the Health, and that got me started. Just watching those movies, just seeing how exploited the animals are, and it just made so much sense that, this is definitely connected with capitalism and what's going on to everyone else in the world under this system. I'm like, it only makes sense to take up a vegan praxis in a way of life. So it just kind of boggles my mind sometimes where people try to hide from it.
And that's something that the liberals and the non-vegan Marxists have in common. They have this contemplative view on the thing, because even the liberals, they accept like animal exploitation is linked to capitalism. But they just say, okay, let's buy vegan products, and one day the industry will shift. We know right. it won't happen. And the communists, the Marxists, they kind of think the same, not in this way, but they just look, okay, there is exploitation and capitalism is like to blame. Let's do something now. So I can see like difference between our like Marxist comrades and the liberals in this way,
Yeah, and like Eric said earlier on, I think, what's really interesting is those that have been oppressed, I find, anyway, in my own experience, those that have been from oppressed groups or have experienced some kind of form of discrimination or oppression in their lives are much more sensitive to the issue of animals, even though they're not necessarily vegan or even, activists. They're just everyday people. And they're much more sympathetic to this position than the college-educated people that have learned through that education process how to fight back against these types of arguments. It's stunning to me how much effort they put into trying to defend exploitation. It's stunning. But the more educated, it seems like some of these educational institutions actually are helping people defend practices that they would never do themselves, that they would find abhorrent. And for whatever reason, they are inadvertently or intentionally supporting and defending. And it's sad and frustrating. It's something, it almost makes me think that our real audience is the working class. Our real audience is the everyday people, not these college-educated whiz kids that think they know everything.
No, I have a friend that's a philosopher, and everyone talks about like people that, for example, the vets, because they treat like cats and dogs, and they eat chickens and pigs and whatever. Yeah. And we always talk about this contradiction, and he always points out that it's not just the vets. He says, I am a philosopher specializing in ethics, and I have my colleagues at the university, and they never think about animal ethics. And they are philosophers, you know what I mean? Like, it's something really weird.
That's really
It's
frightening.
like
It's frightening.
yeah, you kind of cut out one part of the word and say, okay, let's not talk about this. And like, animals are not just like a few, they are like billions, and they don't talk about this. So we can see that a lot, and that's one reason why I'm not like in any university, because it's like, even when you can talk about animal liberation and study on this topic, it's uh, very liberal. uh, you cannot talk about Marx here. Imagine it, Marx and animal liberation. So it's something really, it would be impossible to do that, and that's why I am not included in this sphere of academicism.
Yeah, I mean, just from what I identify as a Marxist-Leninist now, just because just the theories and just the science behind it just makes so much sense, like the historical materialism and dialectics. I think this is the best path toward to adopt animal liberation, because Marxist led revolutions have all, those are the ones that have succeeded in the past. But I want to know more about what does the Brazilian Communist Party, where you are and the party that you're affiliated with, how does animal liberation fit into the party there?
Mhm. Well, our party, like the Brazilian Communist Party, is a Marxist-Leninist party as well. And I always like make this joke, like, we sometimes I think like all the communist parties are like the Brazilian one, but it's not. Like, we are really, really good. Like, of course, Brazil is huge, so we have like a lot of really good people in all the areas of knowledge. It's not just about sociology or history. We have like militants in all the areas, and I'd say we are building an organic thing about animal liberation. We will have our congress that would be this year, but due to the pandemic it will be next year probably, where this question will probably be discussed, because a lot of like people have like brought this up, because it's really important, especially because of our position in International Division of Labor, because like we are like supposed to do all the killing and all this. So it's a question that's being like brought up, and I, of course, I am working hard on this. I have been producing a lot of materials, even internal for the party, and like to be published, like the one you read. And like now and during the pandemic, we do lives like we are doing now, but like live. And so everyone that wants can watch, and we talk about many different things, and one of them is animal liberation. So I'd say more and more people are getting like at least acquainted with the subject, because for many people in the party it's not even a thing.
Right.
So more and more people are like knowing and learning about this now, and I can't see they are refusing or in denial. Uh, of course there are people, but I mean in general they are really open. Like they ask questions, they of course they make these questions that are obvious, but they ask other questions like, oh, but how it would be, we would have to include it in the program, but how, because everything in Brazil is about like livestock and all this, unfortunately our economy is like based on this. So it's a practical problem. Like, how would we do, like, how, if, or for example, if we get like a chair in the Congress, how could we like do this if, like, for example, there is a law about this or that, how could we do? So all these questions, they pop up when we talk about the practical thing of the struggle, of the movement. But I think the communist left in Brazil is really good about this, we have our party, and there is another party that has a specific collective that's eco-socialist. They have really good militants as well that are vegan. Not of them are communists, but they are socialists and they are good. So I'd say we are like growing, and popular veganism is growing definitely, even so people are not linked to any party, you know, but they are building their movements, they all collectives, and that's really good. So I'd say I don't know if I am being so optimistic, but I think that in some years the communist movement, at least in Brazil, will embrace the animal cause. I'd say it's something that's we won't have like how to escape from this.
They're more abrasive with the whole vegan thing. I think it turns people off because it's like a they see it as a bourgeois thing. Like it's like a white bourgeois
But it's just
lifestyle thing, and it's not.
What's more bourgeois than you go to the supermarket and buy parts of animals just because you want?
Right.
No,
It's more expensive.
Yeah, it's completely liberal. Just because I want it, just because I desire or whatever. I can't cope with that. Like, it's not like a valid argument anymore.
I know. It's just like
when you consider one of the things we didn't really talk about, well, a little bit, but the roots of animal agriculture are from European colonialism.
Yeah.
And, you know, they came into the Americas and Mesoamerica and different parts of the Americas, and they basically forced out the indigenous types of agriculture and said, this is the new agriculture, and this is what you will do. This is progress. And the systems that were already in place, which did not rely on draft animals, did not rely on animal exploitation. Of course, there was some hunting in these cultures. However, they didn't exploit millions of, they didn't have systems of exploitation. This comes from the European model of colonial, expansion. And so many people on the left don't even realize that this isn't even indigenous to these countries. This was
even the animals we have are not native. Like they are brought.
Like the chicken, the cow, you know, the pig, that's not indigenous to here.
That's true.
None of them.
You know, the bullfighting and rodeos and all that stuff is all from Europe.
That's what I say when they use the cultural argument. So I say, look, like these animals were not even from here. Like, for example, in Brazil, the indigenous people use it to eat rats. We don't eat rats. Like if we ate rats, so we can use the cultural argument. Okay, so it's something from here, it's native. But we don't do it. We just eat like meat from the industry that are not natural in any way. It's not like a cultural thing. So yeah, it really annoys me.
Yes, me too. I get really revved up about that for sure.
Yeah.
But I understand it's late where you are. I don't want to, keep you up late over there. It's like what, 2 hours ahead? You're like, what is it, 10 o'clock? 11?
No, it's 10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. Okay.
Yeah.
Not too bad.
Yeah.
Maila, thank you very much. It was really good to get to know you, and we'll have to look into your work more, and hopefully we can have you on our show again in the future.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, it would be great.
Yeah, we should definitely collaborate again. This is such this is such a great conversation and refreshing. Your work, I hope there's more of it coming out soon, especially on this topic. It's very needed right now, especially with what's going on in the world. Before we wrap up, please let our viewers know where they can find your work.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I just wrote an article about the animal commodity form. that I think that will be a really good like reference. I mean, for next studies. But I haven't translated it to English yet. I will do it soon, and as soon as I have it, I will share with you for sure.
Oh my gosh, we
All
can't
right.
wait for it. We're on pins and needles waiting for it. So thank you so much for joining us again. And this is the Red Lettuce. We look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great night.